The Hells Angels biker found the little girl holding a tarnished locket behind a barn door, and the truth inside broke him open. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun was beginning to set over the open fields as the roar of a motorcycle pierced the stillness of the quiet country road. The rider, clad in the iconic Hells Angels jacket, was a man whose life had been molded by the harsh realities of the road. His name was Jake, but his brothers in the club knew him as Razor, a man who'd seen and done things that left scars both inside and out. He wasn't the type to stop for much, especially not in a place like this. But something tugged at him. His motorcycle slowed as he noticed a small, frail figure standing by the barn door just ahead. The girl was barely visible in the dimming light, but there was something about her that made him stop. He hadn't expected to find anyone out here in this rural part of town, let alone a child. As Jake approached, the girl didn't move, her back against the barn as if she were waiting for something or someone. He killed the engine and dismounted his bike, his boots hitting the ground with a muffled thud. The moment his feet hit the earth, he noticed the locket. The little girl clutched it in her small hands, her fingers wrapped tightly around it, as if it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The tarnished locket caught the last rays of the fading sun, giving off a faint, almost ghostly glow. Something about the way she held it made Jake pause. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him, clutching the locket even harder as if afraid it might be taken away. "Are you all right, kid?" Jake asked, his voice softer than it usually was. She didn't respond, but her eyes spoke volumes. She was scared, but there was something in her gaze, something familiar. Jake crouched down slowly, trying not to appear as intimidating as he surely was. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, trying to offer some comfort. The girl still didn't speak. Her clothes were dirty, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but there was something in the way she held the locket that intrigued him. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of something deeper, something hidden. Jake's mind raced, and for a moment, he forgot all about the rough exterior he had carefully crafted over the years. There was something about this little girl that cracked through his hardened exterior, something about her innocence that felt like a punch to the gut. He reached out slowly, trying to gently pry the locket from her hand. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked again, this time more gently. The girl's grip loosened, and with a small, reluctant movement, she handed him the locket. Jake studied it for a moment. The tarnished surface seemed to tell its own story, worn down by time, but the engraving on the back caught his attention. It was a name, his name. Razor's heart skipped a beat. How could this be? The locket had been tucked away for so long, but there it was, engraved with the name of someone he thought he'd never see again. The truth began to dawn on him. This was no ordinary girl. She was connected to a past he had buried, a past that had haunted him for years. The locket held the key to a mystery that had been sealed away, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. And now, here it was, in his hands, in the hands of this little girl who seemed to be waiting for him to make sense of it all. Jake stood up, his mind racing. This wasn't just an encounter. This was something far more significant. The girl wasn't just holding a locket. She was holding the truth, a truth that could break him open in ways he never imagined. What did this all mean? How was he connected to this child? The weight of it all began to sink in, and for the first time in years, Jake felt the walls around his heart start to crack. I never expected to find myself standing here, staring down at a tarnished locket with my name engraved on it, in the hands of a little girl I had just met. I didn't know what to make of it, what to say, or even how to feel. My instincts, honed by years of living on the edge, told me to ride off and forget about this encounter. But something about her, something about that locket, made me stay. As I knelt down, still processing the weight of it all, I noticed her eyes, wide and filled with an unspoken sadness. The kind of sadness I knew all too well. The silence between us hung thick in the air. I had no idea who she was or why she was holding my past in her tiny hands, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. I couldn't just walk away. Not from her. not from the truth that seemed to be unfolding right before my eyes. I stood up slowly, still gripping the locket in my hand, trying to make sense of what this all meant. The girl was trembling, but I could see the courage in her eyes. She wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of anything anymore. She was just waiting for me to figure out what was next. "You okay, kid?" I finally asked, my voice rougher than usual. She nodded, but I could see the fear lingering in her expression. She had been through something deep. She wasn't just a scared little girl. She was a survivor. "What's your name?" I asked gently, taking a step closer. She hesitated for a moment, clutching the locket even tighter, but then she looked up at me. "Emma," she said quietly, almost as if she wasn't sure whether she could trust me. "Emma," I repeated, feeling the weight of the name on my tongue. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." The words came out easier than I thought they would. I hadn't spoken like that in years. It was strange. A part of me wanted to pull away, wanted to keep the walls up, but Emma's presence was disarming. It was like she had already chipped away at the stone I had built around my heart. As I tried to piece together what had just happened, I realized something. This wasn't just about the locket. This wasn't about the past or the name engraved on the back. It was about her. About Emma. The truth inside that locket, whatever it was just the beginning. "You found this behind the barn?" I asked, looking around at the dilapidated building. Emma nodded. "Yes, my mama told me to keep it safe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said it was important. But now, I don't know what to do." I could feel the weight of her words settling in my chest. Mama. That word hit me like a punch. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't just some random encounter. This little girl, this fragile soul, was carrying something that tied her directly to me. A part of me wanted to deny it, to walk away, but I couldn't. I had to know the truth. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a message. I could feel it in my gut. My mind raced as I tried to figure out the next step. I didn't know where to start, but one thing was clear. I couldn't leave her here. Not alone. Not with whatever danger was lurking just out of sight. "Come on, let's get you out of here," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'll take you somewhere safe. We'll figure this out." Emma didn't argue. She just nodded, a silent acceptance that only someone who had been through something unimaginable could understand. As I lifted her onto the back of my bike, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. But this time, it wasn't the kind of rush I was used to. This wasn't about freedom or escape. This was about protecting someone who needed me. As I revved the engine and pulled away from the barn, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading straight into something I wasn't prepared for. But there was no turning back now. Whatever the truth was, it was waiting for us. And I was going to find it, no matter the cost. I didn't know where I was going, but the instinct to protect her was overwhelming. The engine of my Harley roared beneath me as Emma clung to my back, her small arms wrapped tightly around my waist. The cool night air bit at my face, but I barely noticed. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, trying to push the swirling thoughts out of my head. I couldn't stop thinking about the locket, the name engraved on it. My name. The past I'd buried so deep had suddenly surfaced, and I was no longer sure where the road would lead. I wasn't the kind of guy who worried about much. I'd lived my life by my own rules, left a trail of destruction behind me, and walked away from anything that made me feel. But something about Emma had broken through. She wasn't just some kid. She was tied to me, and I had no idea why or how. But I knew I had to protect her, no matter the cost. As we rode through the dark streets, I could feel Emma's body stiffen against mine. Her fear was palpable, but she was trying so hard not to show it. I could feel the tension in her tiny frame. She wasn't just afraid of me. She was afraid of something worse. We finally reached my place, an old garage I'd converted into a living space after I'd left the club. The place was a sanctuary from the chaos of my past, though it still had the smell of oil, metal, and years of forgotten memories. I kicked the bike stand down and dismounted, helping Emma off the bike. She looked up at me, her wide brown eyes filled with both fear and a glimmer of trust. "You're safe here," I told her, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. She nodded, though I could see she was still holding that locket like it was her lifeline. "Come on," I said, gently guiding her inside. The place was cold, but I had a couple of blankets and a small space heater. I wasn't the kind of guy who cared about comfort, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't alone. I sat her down on the old couch and grabbed a blanket to wrap her in. As she settled in, I started to pace, trying to figure out what to do next. My mind kept circling back to the locket. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was too much of a coincidence. There was no way this little girl was connected to me by chance. I had no family left, no ties to anyone except the club, and even they had turned their backs on me when things went south. But Emma? She was something else. I didn't know if it was fate or some kind of cosmic joke, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what the locket meant. What's inside the locket? I asked, my voice gentle but firm. Emma looked up at me, her expression unreadable. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the locket, revealing a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to me, and I unfolded it carefully. My breath caught when I saw what was written on it. It was a name. My mother's name. No way, I muttered under my breath. How could this be? My mother had passed away years ago, but the name, the handwriting, it was all too familiar. My heart started to race. The truth was coming out, piece by piece, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I looked at Emma, her eyes still locked on the locket in my hand. She was waiting for me to do something, to say something, but I was at a loss for words. How could a little girl like her be carrying this? What did it all mean? The storm outside had grown heavier, the rain tapping against the windows like a constant reminder of the chaos swirling around us. I felt like I was drowning in questions, but one thing was clear. Emma was connected to me, and there was no turning back now. You've been through a lot, I said softly, sitting down next to her. But I'll help you figure this out. Whatever it takes. She looked up at me then, and for the first time since I'd met her, she gave me a faint smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that there was still hope, even in the darkest of times. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Emma and I had a lot of answers to find, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the locket, the name on it, and the truth I still couldn't fully understand. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her small body curled up in the quiet. It was strange. She was just a kid, but she carried so much weight, more than most adults could handle. I sat by the small space heater, staring at the locket in my hands, trying to make sense of everything. The rain outside had started to die down, but the storm in my head wasn't going anywhere. What did this all mean? How was she connected to me? My past was complicated enough, but now, it felt like I was drowning in questions I didn't have answers for. I didn't know who to trust, but Emma, she was different. I couldn't just leave her here with her mystery and her pain. As I stood up, I heard the faintest movement from Emma, a soft rustling of the blanket. She was awake, though she hadn't made a sound. Are you okay? I asked softly, not wanting to wake her fully, but knowing she was still holding on to something heavy inside. Emma didn't answer at first. She sat up slowly, her small hands fumbling with the edge of the blanket. When she looked at me, there was something different in her eyes, something that had shifted overnight. I think my mama knew you, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't speak for a moment. I wasn't ready to hear that. What do you mean? I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. She looked at the locket in my hands, then back at me. She talked about you sometimes. She said you'd protect me if anything ever happened. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of her words sank deep. I stood there, frozen. I hadn't heard my mother's name in so long, not since I was a kid. But hearing it come from this little girl, from someone who had no reason to know anything about me or my past, was a shock I wasn't prepared for. Why would she say that? I asked, more to myself than to Emma. She shrugged, a little more movement than she had shown before. She just did. I don't really understand it. But she always said you'd be there if I needed you. I sat back down, trying to process everything. My mother had passed away years ago. She had kept so much hidden from me, but I never imagined it would have anything to do with a little girl. Especially not one standing here in front of me, holding the key to a truth I had never known. Emma looked at me with a kind of sadness, as if she knew more than she was willing to say. I don't know what's going on, but I think you're supposed to help me. Her words were simple, but they carried more weight than I could handle. I'll help you, Emma. I don't know how, but I will, I said, though even I wasn't sure what that meant. I was good at fixing bikes, fixing things I understood, but this wasn't something I knew how to fix. I had to get answers, for her, for me. Whatever had happened between my mother and this little girl's family, it was starting to haunt me. There was something important about that locket, something I needed to understand. What happens next? Emma asked, her small voice pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at her, her innocent face so trusting, and I knew I couldn't leave her to face this alone. We get answers, I said, standing up and pacing around the small room. We figure out what your mama meant, and we find out what this locket is all about. Emma nodded, a soft smile breaking across her face. It was small, but it was the first real smile I'd seen from her, and it did something to me. It reminded me why I couldn't just walk away. I wasn't sure what I was about to uncover, but I knew one thing for sure. This little girl had a story, and I was going to help her tell it. We weren't done yet. There were more questions to answer, more truths to uncover, and I wasn't going to stop until we got to the bottom of it. I grabbed my jacket and slipped it on, turning back to her. Let's go. We're going to find out what happened, Emma. And I'm not leaving you until we do. She stood up, walking over to me, the locket still clutched tightly in her hands. It was as if it was a part of her now, a piece of something bigger than either of us. And as we walked out into the cold morning air, I felt the weight of whatever was coming next settling in. This was just the beginning. And I was ready. I started the bike, and the engine roared to life, cutting through the silence of the early morning. Emma sat behind me, clutching the locket tightly in her hands. The cold air whipped past us, but there was something calming about the motion. We weren't just running away from something. We were heading toward the unknown, toward answers, and it felt like the only thing that made sense. The small town streets blurred as we passed, but my mind was focused on one thing: the locket. Emma had said her mother had mentioned me, and that was enough to make the weight of this situation feel heavier than anything I'd ever carried before. The road stretched out in front of us, long and winding, but I wasn't afraid. I knew I had to find the truth for both of us, no matter where it took me. Where are we going? Emma's voice broke through the hum of the bike, quiet but determined. I looked back over my shoulder at her, her face pale but resolute. We're going to find someone who might know about your mom, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I had no plan, no clear path forward, but I knew I couldn't let this go. Emma's mother had been part of a world I'd left behind, a world full of secrets, and now it was clear that the past wasn't done with me yet. The ride seemed to take longer than it should have, the air growing colder as we headed out of town and into the countryside. The houses thinned out, replaced by stretches of open land and rolling hills. We were getting closer to where I thought we might find some answers. After a while, I spotted a small, run-down house tucked away on the edge of the woods. The kind of place where secrets were hidden and people lived in isolation. This was where we needed to be. I parked the bike and turned off the engine, letting the silence settle around us. Stay close, I said to Emma, though she didn't need to be told. She stayed close, her small hand gripping my sleeve as we approached the house. The door creaked when I knocked, and I stood back, waiting. It wasn't long before a woman appeared in the doorway. She was older, with graying hair and a face marked by time and hardship. But when she saw me, her expression changed. Recognition flashed in her eyes, but she didn't speak at first. I'm looking for information about a woman named Sarah, I said, my voice low and guarded. Sarah Chun, I added, watching her reaction closely. The woman's face stiffened, and for a moment, I thought she might slam the door in my face. But instead, she stepped aside, her eyes never leaving mine. Come in, she said, her voice tight. We have things to talk about. We stepped inside, and I could feel the weight of her gaze following us. Emma stayed close to me, her eyes wide as she took in the dusty old house. It was clear that it had seen better days, but the memories it held seemed to linger in the air. The woman led us into a small living room and gestured for us to sit. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her arms crossed as if weighing whether or not to tell us what we needed to know. Finally, she spoke. Sarah was my sister, she said, her voice softening just a little. I hadn't seen her in years. She left this town, and, well, she didn't come back. I didn't know she had a kid. The words hit me like a punch. I had expected something, but not this. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but it still didn't make sense. Emma is Sarah's daughter, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman's face flickered with emotion, a mixture of sadness and regret. She looked at Emma, who was clutching the locket in her small hands, her eyes wide and filled with curiosity. Your mother was in trouble, the woman continued, her voice shaking slightly. There were things she didn't tell me, things she didn't want anyone to know. But I knew something was wrong. She left, and I never saw her again. I didn't even know she had a child. I was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. There was so much more to this story, so many unanswered questions. Do you know what happened to her? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. The woman hesitated, then sighed. I don't know all the details, but she was involved with the Hells Angels at one point. She told me things I didn't understand. But she always said that if anything happened to her, someone would come for the girl. My heart skipped a beat. Someone would come for the girl. It wasn't just the locket that held answers. It was the words she had spoken, the promise she had made. I looked at Emma, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of hope in her eyes. We weren't alone in this. I wasn't alone. I had no idea what I was stepping into, but I knew one thing. I had to protect Emma. She was my responsibility now, and I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. The woman stood up and walked over to a small bookshelf, pulling out a worn, leather-bound journal. She handed it to me. This was Sarah's, she said. Maybe it will help you understand more. But be careful. This world you're walking into isn't like anything you've ever known. I took the journal, my hands shaking slightly as I opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with notes, names, and dates, pieces of a life I hadn't known about. A life that was now tied to me and to Emma. The truth was just beginning to unravel, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I sat there for a while, holding Sarah's journal in my hands, trying to make sense of the pages filled with scribbled notes and hastily written names. The handwriting was familiar, but the words, those words, were like fragments of a life I had never known. Names that meant nothing to me, but everything to Emma. The deeper I read, the more I understood. Sarah hadn't just left the life behind. It was a life she was trying to escape, trying to protect her daughter from. But it seemed like the world she had left was never going to let her go. Emma sat quietly next to me, her eyes still glued to the locket. She hadn't said much since we left the woman's house, but I could feel the weight of her questions, her confusion. I didn't know how to answer them. Didn't know how to tell her that her mother's past was something far darker than I ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. I had to protect her, even if I wasn't sure how. I think I know who can help us, I said, standing up and tossing the journal on the table. But it's going to get complicated. And dangerous. Emma looked up at me, her eyes wide but determined. She was just a little girl, but there was something in her gaze that told me she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had seen more than any kid should have to. I grabbed my leather jacket from the back of the chair and zipped it up. Stay close, I said, and Emma nodded, grabbing her locket and clutching it to her chest. We left the apartment and headed for my bike, the only thing that had ever felt like home. I revved the engine, and Emma climbed on behind me, her small arms wrapping around my waist. The chill of the evening air hit me as we rode through the quiet streets, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused on one thing, finding the answers. The sun was beginning to set as we approached the old warehouse district. It was a place I knew well, a place I hadn't been in years, not since I walked away from the Hells Angels. But tonight, it was the only place where I could get the answers we needed. I parked the bike outside a nondescript building, the only sign of life the faint hum of the old lights above. The place was dark, quiet, like the rest of the world had forgotten it was even there. I turned to Emma before we went inside. Stay close, I said again, my voice firm. And don't speak unless I tell you. She nodded, her face serious. We walked up to the door, and I knocked 3 times. The sound echoed through the empty street. A moment later, the door cracked open, and a pair of eyes peered out. The man who opened the door was older, his face lined with years of hard living. But there was something familiar about him. He was a former member of the club, someone I trusted once, before everything went south. His name was Red, and he was the only one I knew who could help. Jake, Red said gruffly, his eyes flicking to Emma before. He stepped back and let us in. What's this about? I stepped inside, Emma following close behind. I need information, I said. About Sarah. Red's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might turn me away. But then his shoulders dropped, and he gestured to the back of the warehouse. Come on, he said. We've got a lot to talk about. We followed him through the dimly lit space, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the silence. Red stopped at an old wooden table where a few dusty files were stacked. He cleared some space and sat down. Sarah's a ghost, he said, rubbing his chin. She left the club years ago. But she didn't just walk away. She ran. Red's voice was low, as if the very mention of her name carried a weight that he didn't want to carry anymore. Ran from what? I asked, my voice harder now. I didn't have time for games. From the club, Red said, his eyes avoiding mine. From what the club had become. You weren't the only one who saw things differently. She was trying to protect her kid, and she didn't care who she had to run from to do it. He paused, his face clouding over. But some things you can't run from, Jake. And she didn't just run from the Hells Angels. She ran from something darker. I stood up, my heart racing. I had always known there were secrets in the club, things buried deep that no one ever spoke about. But this was something else. What do you mean, darker? I demanded. Red's voice dropped even lower. There's a reason she kept Emma hidden. There's a reason she left that life. It wasn't just the club, Jake. It was everything. The people she was trying to protect her daughter from. He trailed off, shaking his head. You don't understand, man. She didn't just leave the life. She was trying to save Emma from a legacy she never asked for. I looked at Emma, who was standing silently by my side, her small face full of questions. I didn't know how to explain any of this to her. How could I? I didn't even understand it myself. Where is she now? I asked. Red didn't answer right away, his eyes darkening. She's gone, Jake. But the truth will come for you. It always does. I stared at Red, trying to process what he had just told me. Sarah didn't just leave the club. She didn't just walk away from the life she knew. She was running from something deeper, something darker than the Hells Angels. And the truth was out there, waiting for me. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, like the air was too thick to breathe. I had thought I knew everything about that life. The drugs, the violence, the brotherhood that promised loyalty and protection. But now, it seemed like I had only scratched the surface. There was something else going on, something tied to Emma, something that I wasn't ready to face. Red's words echoed in my mind. You don't understand, man. She didn't just leave the life. She was trying to save Emma from a legacy she never asked for. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma. My mind kept circling back to her, to the little girl who had placed that tarnished locket in my hands. She was innocent. She didn't deserve any of this. She didn't deserve the life her mother had been trying to protect her from. But it was clear now. Emma was at the center of this storm, whether she knew it or not. And I wasn't going to let her face it alone. I looked at Red, my voice low and determined. What do I do now? He paused, his eyes darting to the door, as if he was worried someone was listening. You need to find the people who were after her, Red said, his voice almost a whisper. They're not just after Emma. They're after something else. Something bigger. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are they after? I asked, my throat dry. Red shook his head. I don't know, but I know they're dangerous. And they've been looking for Emma since Sarah disappeared. That's why she ran. She was trying to protect her from them. But now they're getting closer. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always known there were people out there who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But I never thought they would come for Emma. Not for her. I turned to Emma, who had been silent throughout the conversation, her small face shadowed with confusion. She didn't understand what was going on, and I wasn't sure how to explain it to her. How could I tell her that the people who had hurt her mother were now after her? How could I tell her that she was in danger, that we were all in danger? I knelt down in front of her, looking into her wide, innocent eyes. Emma, listen to me, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. You're safe with me. I won't let anything happen to you. But I need you to be strong. We're going to find the truth, and we're going to protect you. Do you understand? Emma nodded slowly, her small hands still clutching the locket. I couldn't tell if she fully understood what I was saying, but I knew one thing for sure. She trusted me. And that was something I couldn't take for granted. I stood up, turning back to Red. Where do I start? Red hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn map. He spread it out on the table, pointing to a small town on the outskirts of the city. There's a guy there. His name's Hank. He used to run with Sarah. He knows more than he's letting on. He might know where she went, and he might know who's after you. I stared at the map, my mind racing. Hank. I had heard the name before, but I never thought I'd be looking for him. How do I find him? I asked, my voice tight with impatience. Red didn't answer right away. He was studying me, like he was trying to gauge whether I was ready for whatever came next. Finally, he spoke. Hank doesn't like to be found, but he's got a place in the city. It's an old warehouse, tucked away behind the docks. You'll know it when you see it. And trust me, you don't want to go in unprepared. I nodded, my mind already shifting into overdrive. I'll go tonight. Red's eyes darkened. Be careful, Jake. This thing, it's bigger than you think. It's not just about the club anymore. I stood up, grabbing my jacket and slinging it over my shoulder. I've been careful my whole life, Red. But this time, I'm not backing down. I turned to Emma, who was standing by the door, her eyes still full of questions. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just about her mother anymore. It was about her. It was about keeping her safe, no matter what it took. And if it meant facing whatever was waiting for us in that warehouse, then that's exactly what I would do. I gave Emma a reassuring smile, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to comfort more, her or myself. You ready? I asked, my voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at my gut. She nodded, clutching the locket even tighter. And as we stepped out into the night, I knew that everything was about to change. The truth was waiting, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me from finding it. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into the old warehouse. The night air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to swallow up everything around me. Emma walked close behind, her small figure almost lost in the darkness, but I could feel her presence like a weight on my back. She was depending on me, and I wasn't about to let her down. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows casting eerie shapes across the cracked concrete floor. The place had seen better days, much better. The faded paint, the rusting metal, and the lingering smell of something that hadn't been touched in years told the story of abandonment. But there was a feeling in the air, a pulse that told me we weren't alone. I motioned for Emma to stay behind me as I stepped forward. My eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that Hank was nearby. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly reunion. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space like a warning. I stepped inside, the door closing behind us with a heavy thud. The room was dimly lit by a single, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Dust and debris filled the air, and the silence was almost suffocating. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, loud in the stillness, and Emma's soft footsteps behind me. Stay close, I whispered to her. We don't know who's here. Emma nodded, her grip on my sleeve tightening. As we moved deeper into the warehouse, the floorboards creaked under our feet, and every sound seemed to make the darkness feel heavier. I scanned the room again, looking for any sign of life, but there was nothing, just shadows and silence. Then, I heard it, a faint sound from the back of the warehouse. A door opening, a footstep. I held up a hand, signaling Emma to stay still. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly approached the source of the noise. As I moved forward, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a figure standing by the far wall. Hank. He was older than I remembered, his face weathered by time and a life lived on the edge. His clothes were worn, the leather of his jacket cracked and faded, but the patches on his vest were still unmistakable, symbols of the life he'd once lived. Jake. Hank's voice was gravelly, as if he hadn't spoken in days. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The tension in the air was thick enough. Emma stayed behind me, her presence barely noticeable as she watched the exchange with wide eyes. You've got a lot of explaining to do, Hank, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Hank let out a low chuckle, the sound grating in the quiet. I didn't know it was going to come to this, he said, his eyes flicking to Emma. Sarah never should have dragged you into this. She was trying to protect the kid, but she couldn't keep running forever. My pulse quickened. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded. Hank's expression hardened, and he looked away, his gaze lingering on the old, rusted machinery around the warehouse. Sarah was running from something bigger than the club, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. The people she was running from, they were never going to let her go. They were coming for her, and they're coming for Emma now. I felt my stomach tighten. Who's coming for her? Who's after Emma? Hank didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to a nearby table and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. He flipped it open, revealing pages of scribbled notes, names, and numbers. He shoved the notebook toward me. The club isn't the problem, he said, his voice urgent. It's the people behind the scenes, the ones who pull the strings. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. And Emma, she's the key. I glanced down at the notebook, but the words didn't make sense. They were names I didn't recognize, places I'd never heard of. But there was something about the way Hank was acting that told me he wasn't lying. Emma's future, her safety, was tied to something bigger than any of us could understand. What do they want with her? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What's the truth? Hank's face twisted in a mix of regret and fear. Sarah knew too much. She got involved with the wrong people, and she couldn't get out. She was trying to protect Emma from that life, but she couldn't. And now, they're after her. They'll do whatever it takes to get to her, Jake. I felt the weight of his words settle into my chest, heavy and suffocating. The air around me seemed to grow colder, the reality of what we were facing slowly sinking in. I turned to Emma, her small face pale and full of confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She trusted me, and I couldn't let her down. We're getting out of here, I said, my voice firm. We're going to find a way to keep you safe. Hank stepped forward, blocking my path. It's not going to be that easy, he said. They're already onto you. You have to leave town. You have to go now, before they find you. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Emma's hand and started moving toward the door. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting anyone take her from me. Not now. Not ever. I could feel the weight of Hank's words pressing down on me as we left the warehouse. The dim light from the streetlights barely lit the road ahead, but the fear that settled in my chest was enough to keep me alert. Emma's small hand was firmly clasped in mine, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so young. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her eyes on me, the questions she didn't know how to ask swirling in her mind. I wasn't sure where we were going, but I knew one thing for sure. We had to keep moving. The people after Emma weren't just any criminals. They were shadows, lurking in the background, pulling strings, making sure everything went their way. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but Hank's words had been clear enough. They weren't going to stop. We couldn't stay here any longer. I could feel the tension in the air, the silence between Emma and me as we made our way through the dark streets. The only sounds were the faint hum of the city in the distance and the crunch of our footsteps on the cold pavement. I had to think fast, but it was hard to concentrate with the weight of everything on my shoulders. How could I protect her from this? How could I keep Emma safe from the darkness that had already claimed so much of her life? We turned the corner onto a quieter street, hoping to blend into the shadows, but the sudden screech of tires made me freeze. I turned my head, my heart racing. A black van was speeding toward us, headlights cutting through the night like a knife. Without thinking, I yanked Emma's hand and pulled her toward the alley on the right. We ran, my boots pounding the pavement as I pulled her behind me. The van screeched to a halt at the corner, and the sound of doors opening made my heart skip a beat. They were close. Too close. I could hear their voices, men shouting as they moved toward the alley. Get the kid. Don't let them get away. I pushed Emma ahead of me, the alley getting tighter and darker as we ran. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything to get us out of this. There was no time to waste. We couldn't outrun them forever. But there was one place I knew, one place that could keep us hidden, at least for a while. I pulled Emma into a narrow passageway, hoping they wouldn't see us. The footsteps behind us grew louder, but we were close now, so close. We reached a door at the end of the alley, one I hadn't used in years but knew well. It was an old service door to an abandoned building, one that had been left untouched for a long time. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course, it was locked. My pulse quickened as I looked over my shoulder. The men were getting closer. I slammed my shoulder against the door, hoping it would give, but it didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, and the wood splintered just enough for me to force it open. We stumbled inside, and I quickly slammed the door behind us, pressing my back against it as I listened. I could hear them now, the sound of their boots hitting the pavement, getting closer. They hadn't seen us yet. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped just outside the alley. I looked down at Emma, who was breathing hard, her small face pale but determined. Stay quiet, I whispered. She nodded, her wide eyes filled with trust and fear. I gently pulled her deeper into the building, moving carefully so we wouldn't make any noise. The place was dark and empty, the smell of decay heavy in the air. The only sound was the soft shuffle of our footsteps on the cracked floor. The building had once been something, maybe a factory or an old warehouse, but now it was just a shell of what it had been. I knew it well, though. It was one of the few places no one bothered to check. A hideout, if you will. I'd used it once, years ago, when things had gone wrong with the club. It wasn't much, but it would keep us safe for now. We need to stay here for a while, I said, looking around the dark space. We'll wait until they're gone, then figure out what to do next. Emma nodded again, her hand still tightly gripping mine. I could feel her fear, but there was something else there too. Something that reminded me of my own past, of the time when I was just as scared and unsure as she was. But I had survived. I had learned how to stay alive, and I would do everything I could to make sure she survived too. I moved further into the building, searching for something, anything that could help. There was nothing here. No food, no water, no supplies. Just the bare walls and the broken remnants of a forgotten time. I found an old chair and motioned for Emma to sit. Stay here, I told her. I'll keep watch. She sat down, her eyes wide as she looked around the empty room. I could see the questions in her eyes, the uncertainty, but she didn't say anything. She trusted me. That thought hit me harder than I expected. This little girl, who had already lost so much, was depending on me. I couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. The hours dragged on, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the building or the distant sounds of the men searching outside. Every noise made my heart race. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I didn't know how long we would have to stay here, but I knew one thing for sure. We weren't leaving until it was safe. And I would do whatever it took to make sure we got out of this alive. I sat in the darkness of the old building, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The quiet was almost suffocating. Emma sat beside me, her small frame huddled into the corner, her eyes darting between the cracks in the walls and the door we had slipped through earlier. We had been here for hours, the sounds of footsteps and voices outside the building fading into nothing, but I knew we couldn't relax yet. They were out there. They were always out there. I had been in situations like this before, running from enemies who never stopped hunting. But this was different. This was Emma. She wasn't supposed to be in this world. She was a kid, caught in the crossfire of a life she never asked for. And now, it was my job to make sure she didn't get caught in it any longer. I glanced at her, her eyes still wide with confusion. She didn't speak much, just clutched the locket and looked at me as if she was waiting for something to happen. Something to make sense of all this chaos. I couldn't give her that, not yet. I couldn't explain to her the darkness that followed us, the danger we were running from. But I could protect her. I could make sure she didn't end up like the others, like her mother. I stood up and walked toward the small window at the back of the building. I peered out through the dirty glass, scanning the street below. It was quiet, too quiet. I didn't trust it. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, a place no one really cared about, but that didn't mean it was safe. Not anymore. My eyes caught a movement across the street. A shadow passing by the alley, barely noticeable, but enough to set off every alarm in my head. I turned back to Emma, who had quietly followed me across the room. Stay low, I told her, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. She nodded, looking up at me with a mixture of trust and fear. I could see it in her eyes. She was scared. And why wouldn't she be? She had every right to be. But I couldn't let her show it. I had to keep it together for her. I'll be right back, I said, walking toward the door. Emma didn't say anything, but I could feel her watching me, waiting. I stepped into the dark hallway of the building, my footsteps muffled by the worn floorboards. I reached the back door and cracked it open just enough to slip through. The air outside was cold, biting, and it hit me in waves as I stepped into the alley. I stayed close to the walls, moving as silently as I could. I knew there was a chance they were waiting for me to slip up. But I had to know. I had to know what was going on out there. My heart raced as I crept down the alley, my hand resting on the gun tucked in my waistband. I knew I couldn't just confront them. I wasn't stupid. I had to play it smart, stay out of sight, get the information I needed, and get back to Emma. I reached the corner of the alley and peeked around it. Across the street, I saw two figures standing near the van, their faces hidden in the shadows. They were talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I strained my ears, trying to catch a few words, but the wind was too strong, and the street was too quiet. One of the men looked up suddenly, scanning the area. My heart skipped a beat. He was looking right at me. I froze, pressing my back against the brick wall, praying he wouldn't see me. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. But the man turned away and nodded to the other figure. They moved toward the van, and my pulse began to slow. I had been lucky, but I couldn't count on luck to keep me safe for long. I took a deep breath and eased my way back into the building, my mind racing. I had seen enough. They were looking for Emma. They knew we were here, and they were closing in. I needed to move. Fast. I re-entered the room where Emma was waiting. She looked up at me with wide eyes, and I could see the question in her gaze. "We have to go," I said, my voice low but urgent. "Now." Emma stood up immediately, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. I didn't have to tell her why. She knew. She had already seen enough. We made our way toward the back door again, this time more cautiously. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of every step. We didn't speak, but I could tell Emma was scared. She was trying to be brave, but I could see it in her eyes. She was just a kid, but she had already seen more than she ever should have. I had to get her out of here. We reached the back door, and I peered through the crack. The alley was still empty, but I wasn't fooled. They were out there, watching. We had to make it to the bike without being seen. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping out into the cold night air. I looked around, my eyes scanning the shadows, waiting for any movement. When I saw none, I motioned for Emma to follow me. We crept along the alley, sticking to the shadows, moving as quietly as we could. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my focus. I couldn't let anything happen to her. Not now. Not ever. We reached the end of the alley, and I could see the bike parked on the street. Just a few more steps. We were so close. But as I stepped into the street, I heard a car engine roar to life behind us. I spun around, my heart racing. A set of headlights flashed through the dark, and I knew. Then, we weren't going to make it out unnoticed. The roar of the engine grew louder, and my heart pounded in my chest. They had us. The headlights swept across the alley, cutting through the darkness, and I knew they were closing in. We weren't getting out unnoticed. I grabbed Emma's hand tighter, pulling her toward the bike. We had to move, and we had to move fast. I didn't waste a second. "Run," I whispered sharply, tugging Emma along with me. Her small legs struggled to keep up, but she followed, her breath quickening in the cold night air. We were only a few yards away from the bike, but the sound of the car engine revving up behind us sent a wave of panic through me. I turned my head to glance back, just in time to see the dark silhouette of the car speeding toward us. The moment I saw those headlights, I knew what was coming. I didn't have time to think, only to act. "Get on," I shouted, throwing my leg over the bike and starting the engine with a roar. Emma scrambled to climb on behind me, her hands gripping my jacket as I revved the engine. We were already on the move when the car came screeching to a halt just behind us. I could hear the doors opening, the sound of boots hitting the pavement. We had seconds, maybe less. I pushed the throttle down hard, and the bike surged forward into the street, the roar of the engine drowning out everything else. We shot down the empty road, the wind blasting past us, but I didn't dare look back. I kept my focus ahead, knowing if I lost my concentration for even a second, they would catch us. The streets blurred as we sped through them, the cold air biting at my skin, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about Emma, about getting her to safety. I could feel her clutching me tightly, her small body pressed against mine, but I couldn't slow down. Not yet. The last thing I needed was for them to catch up, to drag us back into whatever nightmare was waiting for us. I could see the lights of the city up ahead, the road finally opening up to the outskirts, but I wasn't taking any chances. I swung a hard left onto a side street, the tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Every instinct I had told me to keep moving, keep going. "Hold on tight," I shouted back to Emma, her face pressed against my back. I could hear her breathing hard, but she didn't say a word. She trusted me. That trust was all I had right now. I wasn't going to fail her. The city was behind us now, and the sounds of the pursuit seemed to fade away. I dared a glance back over my shoulder, and I didn't see anything. No headlights, no car chasing us. But I knew it was too soon to relax. We weren't out of danger. Not yet. I pushed forward, weaving through the empty streets, heading toward the old part of town where I knew there was a place we could hide. The sun was starting to rise, but it felt like the longest night of my life. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by the deep exhaustion that threatened to pull me under. But I couldn't stop. Not until I knew Emma was safe. I turned another corner, slowing down just enough to make the turn, and there it was, an old, run-down garage I used to know. It was far enough out of the way, hidden from sight, and nobody came out this far unless they were looking for trouble. But that was exactly what I needed. Trouble-free. This is it, I said, slowing the bike to a stop in front of the garage. I didn't wait for Emma to say anything. I swung my leg off the bike and helped her down. Come on, Emma. We're safe here for now. She nodded, still holding on to the locket, the little piece of her mother's world that had started all of this. We walked into the garage, the door creaking as I pulled it open. The place was dusty, abandoned, but it would do. It wasn't much, but it was ours for the moment. I locked the door behind us, the sound of the bolt clicking into place echoing in the empty room. I looked over at Emma, who was standing near the corner, clutching the locket. Her wide eyes were filled with questions, but she didn't ask them. She was quiet, just waiting for me to tell her what happened next. You did good, I said, walking over to her. You're safe now. She looked up at me, her voice small. What happens now? I sighed, sitting down on the old workbench. Now we wait. We lay low until we figure out what's going on. And we stay here. No one knows about this place, so we'll be okay. Emma nodded slowly, sitting down beside me. She didn't speak, but I could tell she was scared. I could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the uncertainty. But she was trying so hard to be brave. I reached over and put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. You're going to be okay, Emma. We'll figure this out. I won't let anything happen to you. I didn't know if I believed it myself, but I had to say it. I had to make her believe it. I stood up and walked over to the corner, where I pulled out a couple of old blankets from a dusty box. Get some rest, I told her. I'll keep watch. She didn't argue. She just lay down on the blankets, still clutching the locket in her small hands. I watched her for a moment, the weight of the world on my shoulders. We weren't out of danger, not by a long shot. But for now, we were safe. And that was enough. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the old garage. The place was silent, save for the occasional creak of wood or the hum of the wind outside. Emma had fallen asleep on the blankets, the locket still clutched tightly in her small hands. I sat nearby, my eyes scanning the empty room, but my mind was racing. The night had passed without incident, but I knew that couldn't last. They were still out there, looking for us, and I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I ran my hand over my face, the exhaustion catching up to me. I hadn't slept much. Too much had happened in too little time, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to escalate. I looked over at Emma, who was curled up on the makeshift bed, her face peaceful in her sleep. For a moment, I almost let myself believe that we were safe, that maybe we could stay here, hidden away from the world. But, deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I stood up slowly, trying not to wake her, and walked over to the old workbench. The room was cluttered with tools and forgotten equipment, remnants of a life I had once known. But none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was keeping Emma safe. I couldn't fail her. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my thoughts. My mind kept going back to Hank's warning, his words haunting me. The people she was running from. They were never going to let her go. That thought alone had kept me up for hours, wondering who these people were, what they wanted, and how far they were willing to go to get Emma. I knew they wouldn't stop. They had already proven that. The question was, how far would I go to protect her? How far was I willing to push myself? I walked over to the corner of the room where I had hidden my old gear, a few extra weapons, some supplies. I didn't want to involve anyone else. I couldn't risk bringing anyone into this mess, but I knew that I had to be prepared. As I checked the ammunition, the sound of a distant engine reached my ears, cutting through the stillness. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Was it them? My eyes immediately went to the cracked window, peering outside, but all I saw were the empty streets, bathed in the pale light of the early morning. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I didn't trust it. I had to make sure. I walked over to Emma, gently shaking her shoulder to wake her. Emma, I whispered, my voice low but urgent. She stirred, her eyes slowly opening, still tired from the night. You need to stay quiet, okay? There might be trouble. Emma nodded, the seriousness in her eyes telling me she understood. I helped her sit up, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I could feel her fear, but she was trying to be brave, just like she had when we first met. I grabbed my jacket and slipped it on, moving toward the door. "Stay close to me," I said, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. I wasn't sure if the engine was coming closer or if it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't risk it. I wasn't going to take any chances. We stepped outside into the cold morning air, the sound of the engine growing louder. I kept my eyes on the street, searching for any sign of movement. The van from last night? A new set of headlights? I couldn't tell. I had to be sure. We moved quickly, staying low, keeping to the shadows of the alleyways. Emma's hand was tight in mine as we moved through the streets, her footsteps light but steady. I couldn't afford to let her slip behind. Every moment felt like an eternity. I wasn't sure where we were headed, but we couldn't stay here any longer. The old warehouse wouldn't be safe for much longer, not with whoever was looking for us getting closer. I turned another corner, eyes scanning every movement. Suddenly, the sound of the engine stopped. I froze. Something didn't feel right. My instincts kicked in, telling me to keep moving, to find cover, but I wasn't sure where to go. I pulled Emma to the side, pressing her against the wall of an old building. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow. I strained to hear, trying to catch any sounds, any clues. I couldn't see anything. No headlights, no figures moving in the distance. It was as if the world had stopped. Then, a voice. Low, quiet. "Jake." The name came from behind me, and I whipped around, my hand already on the grip of my gun. I was ready for anything, but what I saw made me hesitate. A man stood there, a familiar face from the past. He was older, his face lined with years of hard living, but I knew him. "Tommy," I said, lowering my gun. Tommy was an old friend, someone I had known back when things were simpler, before everything fell apart. But his appearance now wasn't what I expected. There was something different about him, something in his eyes. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice rough. "I heard about Emma. I had to find you before they did." I narrowed my eyes. "Who's after us, Tommy?" He looked around, his gaze darting nervously. "The people you're running from, they know you're here. They've got their sights set on her now, Jake. And they won't stop until they get what they want." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was bigger than I had thought. Much bigger. And now, I had to make a choice. A choice that would determine Emma's fate and mine. The air in the alley felt thick, heavy with the weight of decisions I wasn't ready to make. Tommy's words hung in the air, thick with implications. "They know you're here. They've got their sights set on her now, Jake." I could feel the pressure building, the familiar ache of my past pulling me back into a world I had worked so hard to escape. But I couldn't turn away. Not now. Not when Emma was depending on me. I looked at Tommy, his face older than I remembered, worn with regret, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't just here to warn me. He was here because he knew the danger was real. The stakes were higher than either of us had imagined. "Who's after us, Tommy?" I asked again, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He hesitated, his gaze shifting to the shadows as if he could feel them closing in. "It's not just some random group, Jake. These people, whoever they are, they're connected. They have eyes everywhere. If they're after Emma, then they'll stop at nothing." I felt a cold rush through me. I had dealt with criminals, with people who lived in the shadows. But this was different. Emma's life was on the line, and I couldn't protect her if I didn't know who the enemy was. "What do we do now?" I asked, my eyes locked on Tommy's. "We leave," he said simply. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We make sure they don't know where we're going." I could feel the weight of his words, the urgency in his voice. I wasn't sure I was ready to leave, but I knew we didn't have a choice. We had to move before they found us. "Where are we going?" I asked. Tommy looked over at the bike, then back at me. "There's an old safe house. A place no one knows about. It's far enough out of the way to keep you both safe for a while." I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. I didn't know this safe house, didn't trust it, but I trusted Tommy. He had never led me wrong before. "Let's go," I said, turning toward Emma, who had been standing quietly beside me, her small face full of confusion. She didn't understand everything that was happening, and I couldn't explain it all to her. But she knew enough to see the fear in my eyes. "Emma," I said gently, "we need to move. Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, gripping the locket in her hand. the only connection to her mother she had left. I could feel her fear, but I could also see the determination in her eyes. She was a fighter, just like her mother. We walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, moving like ghosts through the streets. Tommy led the way, his footsteps steady, and I kept Emma close, watching every corner, every shadow. I wasn't about to let anyone take her. We reached the bike, and Tommy gave me a look. "We have to move fast," he said. I nodded, helping Emma onto the bike, then climbing on behind her. Tommy started his engine, and we took off into the night, the wind whipping past us, the roar of the engine filling the silence. We kept to the back streets, avoiding the main roads where we could be seen. Every turn, every mile felt like a lifetime. I kept my eyes on Emma, her small form pressed against me, and I couldn't help but think of all the things I'd promised her mother. I had promised I would protect her, and I would, no matter what it took. The road stretched out ahead of us, but I knew we couldn't keep running forever. We had to find a way to stop these people, to get to the bottom of whatever mess Sarah had left behind. But I couldn't think about that right now. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting Emma to safety. After what felt like hours, we pulled off onto a dirt road that led into the woods. The safe house was just ahead. It wasn't much, an old cabin that had been abandoned for years, but it was the perfect place to hide out for a while. Tommy stopped the bike, and I followed him as we made our way up to the front door. I looked around, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. The last thing we needed was someone following us here. Tommy opened the door, and I stepped inside, looking around the dimly lit room. The cabin was small, but it was enough. It would be a safe haven for now. I closed the door behind us, and Tommy turned to me. "We stay here until we figure out what's next," he said. "But you need to know, Jake, these people are dangerous. They won't stop until they get Emma." I nodded, my mind racing with the possibilities. "I won't let them have her," I said firmly. Tommy gave me a hard look, as if weighing my words. "You have to be ready. These people aren't afraid of anything. And if they're coming for her, they'll come for you too." I turned to look at Emma, who had already found a place on the old couch, still clutching the locket. She was exhausted, but she had been so strong through all of this. "We'll make it through this," I said softly. "I promise." I didn't know how, but I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let Emma face this alone, and I wasn't going to let anyone take her from me. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows, but I was going to find it. And when I did, I'd make sure those who threatened Emma would regret it. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.